Tonight we are leaving the dry, solid comfort of your bed behind. In its place, you feel a cold, persistent wind coming off a slate-gray sea, carrying with it the tang of salt, wet wood, and an overwhelming, eye-watering perfume of fish. You are standing on a shingle beach somewhere on the east coast of medieval England, let's say around the 13th century, and the air isn't just scented, it's thick with it. Under your thick woolen hose, your feet are already going numb from the damp chill seeping up from the stones. Out in the mist, you can hear the rhythmic groan of wooden boats and the distant, shrieking chorus of gulls. This is your new reality. For the next while, we are not just learning about the medieval fish salting trade, we are living a season within it. And a gentle, sleepy warning: you are about to handle thousands of dead fish with your bare hands, in the cold, for hours on end, with only the promise of hard bread and weak ale as a reward. You probably won't survive a week. But then again, most of the people doing this job didn't expect to live a long and easy life either. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are not yet a fisherman. Your first lesson in the careful world of medieval fish salting is one of patience, of waiting for the wealth of the sea to simply arrive. You are part of a shore crew, a land shark as the boardier boatman might call you. Your eyes are fixed on the horizon, watching for the sight that will send this entire stretch of coastline into a frenzy, the shoals of herring. They move as a single, shimmering entity, a silver of the sea so vast it can darken the water. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The medieval North Sea herring fishery was one of the foundational industries of Northern Europe, a natural resource that shaped kingdoms. But you aren't thinking about geopolitics. You're stamping your feet, trying to keep the feeling in your toes, listening to the old men beside you mutter about the signs. The color of the water. The behavior of the birds. The smell on the wind, which, impressively, manages to cut through the ever-present fish stink. The wait is a strange, suspended time. Around you, the tools of the coming storm are being prepped. Massive, shallow wicker baskets called swills are stacked like wobbly towers. Barrows with wobbly wheels sit ready. And there are the troughs, long, hollowed-out logs or crudely nailed plank constructions, already crusted white from seasons of use. This is your workstation, your altar. Everything is damp. Everything smells. And you are already a little bit hungry, but the thought of eating fish right now is, frankly, horrifying. A younger boy next to you, his nose running freely in the cold, is being lectured by a grizzled veteran. Forget the big splashes, the man grumbles, watch for the smooth, oily patch. That's the back of the shoal. That's where the money is. It's a lesser-known, slightly amusing detail that these fishermen had an entire lexicon for parts of a herring shoal, describing them almost like features of the landscape: the head, the run, the heel. They'd argue about it with the fervor of cartographers mapping unknown continents. Finally, a shout goes up from a watchman on a dune. A chaotic, thrilling energy crackles through the air. The boats are returning. Not the slow, laborious row back of a normal day, but a frantic, skidding approach. The shallow drafted herring buses laden so low with their glittering catch that seawater slops over the gunnels with every wave. The race against time has officially begun. The fish are dead, but their flesh is already beginning its slow, inevitable surrender to decay. From this moment, every action you take, every scoop, every barrel, every handful of salt, is a desperate, careful bargain with rot. Historians still argue whether the success of the northern European herring fishery was due more to the sheer abundance of the fish or to the iterative, hard-won perfection of the preservation techniques that developed around it. Was it a gift of nature, or a triumph of human grit and procedure? As you rush into the icy surf to help drag the boats ashore, the freezing water shocking your lungs, you suspect it might be a brutal, smelly combination of both. The careful world is about to get very, very busy. The chaos that envelops the beach is a form of organized madness, a symphony composed entirely of splashing, shouting, and the slithering of scales. Your earlier numbness is gone, burned away by adrenaline. The lead boat grounds itself on the shingle with a grinding sigh, and before it's fully still, men are leaping over the sides into the knee-deep, frigid surf. You are handed a massive wicker basket. The swill, it's weaved tight enough to hold water, let alone fish. You wade forward, the water clutching at your legs like a cold, insistent hand. The hold of the boat is a seething, shimmering mass of silver. The herring, each one no longer than your hand, are packed so densely they look like a single, breathing organism. Using a wooden scoop, a fisherman begins heaving them into your basket. The weight is immediate, shocking, and wet. Salt water and fish slime sluice through the wicker, soaking your tunic front. The smell, up close, is profound. It's not just fishy, it's sweet, metallic, and deeply organic. A few Harrington, your basket flips and glints a dead, black eye at you. This is your life now. You stagger back to shore, the basket's handle cutting into your palms. This is the first critical transfer in a chain that cannot break. The fish must move from sea, to barrel, to salt, as quickly as humanly possible. There is no time for philosophy, only for motion. You dump your load with a wet crash into one of the long, waiting troughs. Around you, the shore crew has fallen into roles with the ease of long practice. The gutters are already taking their places, short, sharp knives in hand. They grab a herring, slice it from throat to vent with a single, practiced flick, scoop out the entrails with a thumb, and toss the cleaned fish into a fresh swill. The guts go into a stinking bucket for the poor, or for fertilizer, or just to be dumped back into the surf. The speed is hypnotic, a blur of silver and crimson. Your job is to keep the gutters supplied and to move the cleaned fish to the salting station. It's menial, back-breaking, and utterly vital. Here's a widely accepted historical fact. The gutting of herring at sea, or immediately upon landing, was non-negotiable. The guts contain enzymes that accelerate spoilage at a remarkable rate. Leaving them in would turn your precious barrel into a putrid soup within days, not months. So the gutters work with a furious, silent focus, their hands moving faster than your eyes can easily follow. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that the very best gutters, the artists of this grim craft, were often women. In ports from Scarborough to the Low Countries, women formed the backbone of the processing lines, renowned for their speed and dexterity. They could process thousands of fish in a day, their fingers nicked and scarred, their aprons stained with scales and blood, their earnings crucial to the household economy. You watch one now, her head wrapped in a linen cloth, her knife a silver flash. She doesn't look up. She exists only in the rhythm. Grab, slice, scoop, toss. Grab, slice, scoop, toss. You heft another swill of glistening, cleaned herring. They feel different already, lighter, less substantial. The clock is ticking even faster now. Without the protective layer of its organs, the flesh is even more vulnerable. They need salt, and they need it now. As you carry your load towards the salting sheds, you pass the fisherman who captained the lead boat. He's not celebrating. He's staring intently at the sky, then at the sea, rubbing his bearded chin. He's already thinking about the next tide, the next shoal. This catch, for all its frantic effort, is just one entry in a seasonal ledger. Historians still argue whether this intense, industrial-scale fishing had a significant impact on herring stocks in the medieval period. Some point to records of complaints about declining catches near certain ports as early as the 14th century. Others argue the shoals were so astronomically vast that human efforts, even with nets, were a mere nibble at an endless resource. The fisherman's worried look suggests he might side with the former group. For you, however, the debate is academic. Your world has shrunk to the weight of the basket in your hands, the slickness under your feet, and the urgent, careful journey from surf to salt. The cleaned herring are piling up, a growing mountain of silvery, vulnerable flesh. But your journey with them hits a pause, a logistical bottleneck as fundamental as the sea itself. You cannot proceed without the other key ingredient, the white gold of this entire enterprise, salt. And it's nowhere to be seen on this windy, fish-stinking beach. So, in your mind's eye, we must travel. The chill of the North Sea fades, replaced by a different, drier heat. You are now standing on the marshy, flat coast of somewhere like Lüneburg in Germany, or perhaps the sunny shores of the Bay of Biscay. Here, the air doesn't smell of fish. It smells of mud, of sun-warmed brine, and of a clean, mineral sharpness that cuts the back of your throat. Before you stretches a bizarre, geometric landscape. Shallow, rectangular ponds, carved into the clay and lined with tiles, glitter under the sun. These are salt pans. This is where the miracle of preservation begins, not with a net, but with evaporation. Seawater is channeled into the first, largest pond. The sun and wind work slowly, tirelessly, concentrating the brine. As the water disappears, it's moved to a smaller, shallower pan. The process repeats, a careful, slow dance with the elements, until finally, in the last and smallest pan, a crust of pure white salt begins to crystallize at the edges. Workers with long wooden rakes, their legs caked in white dust, carefully harvest this crust, piling it into gleaming, iridescent mounds. It looks like snow, but it is wealth. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Salt was a commodity of immense value, often transported along dedicated salt roads, and its production was a tightly controlled, sometimes state-monopolized industry. Wars were fought over salt springs. Taxes were levied on salt pans. The salt you will use to save your herring has its own long, expensive story. But not all salt is created equal. The salt from these coastal pans, harvested from seawater, is the premium product. It's relatively clean, fine-grained, and potent. As you might imagine, it's also expensive. In other places, they might use mined rock salt, ground down, which could carry impurities that tint the fish or affect the taste. Or, in a pinch, they might even burn certain salt-rich seaweed to produce a bitter, smoky ash to use as a last resort preservative. The salt you will get for your North Sea herring likely comes from the Baltic or from southern France, having traveled hundreds of miles by cart and cog. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that medieval people were connoisseurs of salt in ways we might not expect. They classified it by origin, grain, and even color, believing different salts were better for different purposes. A certain white, fine salt from Bourneuf Bay in France was considered the best for fish, its reputation spreading across Europe. You can imagine the salter on your beach, receiving a shipment, rubbing a pinch between his fingers, tasting it on his tongue, and judging its worth like a wine merchant sampling a new vintage. The cost of this salt is the ghost in every calculation of the fish trade. It is the single greatest expense after the labor itself. The merchant who owns the operation will have had to secure it on credit, promising a share of the final, salted barrels. The fisherman's share will be calculated after the cost of the salt and the barrels are deducted. This mineral is the silent partner who takes the first and largest cut. Historians still argue whether the fish trade drove the salt trade, or if the availability of cheap salt enabled the explosion of the fish trade. It's a classic chicken or the egg problem, but with more brine. Was it the demand from millions of fasting Catholics needing preserved protein that spurred the development of vast salt works? Or was it the existence of those salt works, perhaps originally serving local needs, that made the mass export of North Sea herring conceivable in the first place? Standing in this sun-baked pan, the white crystals crunching under your imaginary feet, you feel the weight of that question. This isn't just seasoning. It is the key to time itself, the alchemical agent that will, if you're careful and lucky, suspend your herring in an edible stasis for a year or more. Now, we must bring it back to the damp, urgent reality of the beach. The salt arrives, and with it, a different kind of specialist. You are no longer on the beach or in the sun-baked pans. You are in a timber-framed shed, its air dense with the scent of fresh-cut wood and the earthy smell of wet staves. This is the cooper's domain. The man himself is a figure of focused calm amidst the frenzy outside, his muscular arms moving with a precision that speaks of years, maybe decades, of apprenticeship. He is building the world your herring will inhabit for its long sleep, the barrel. You watch as he selects curved wooden staves, oak, ideally, for its strength and resistance to rot, arranging them in a circle on the ground like the spokes of a giant, incomplete wheel. He fits them into a temporary hoop, tapping them with a wooden mallet until they stand on their own, a hollow, rib-like skeleton. This is the raise. Then, the real magic begins. He builds a small fire of wood shavings in the center of the upturned barrel. As the flames lick the interior, he constantly rotates the shell, heating the staves until they are pliable. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The cooper's art of bending staves with heat and moisture was a sophisticated technology, one that created a container of remarkable strength and versatility. A well-made barrel could withstand incredible pressure, be rolled easily, stacked efficiently, and even float if lost overboard. It was the shipping container of the Middle Ages. Now, with the wood softened by heat and steam, he pulls a rope attached to a windlass, tightening the staves together with a chorus of groans and creaks. Quickly, before they cool and set, he hammers a permanent iron hoop down over the top, locking the shape. More hoops follow, each one precision-driven to sit in its groove. He planes the top edge smooth, cuts a groove for the lid, and finally, fits the base and top head into place. The final act is to drive the bung hole into one stave, the tiny portal through which the fish will enter and, eventually, be extracted. What was a pile of wood is now a vessel. It looks simple, almost crude. But its creation required an intimate understanding of wood grain, moisture, metalwork, and geometry. The cooper wipes his brow, gives the barrel a spin to test its roll, and nods. It is ready. He will make dozens, hundreds more before the season is out. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that coopers, like fish gutters, were often part of a powerful guild. Their knowledge was fiercely protected. In some towns, it was illegal for anyone but a guild-certified cooper to make or even repair barrels used for trade. They had strict rules about the quality of wood, the number of hoops, and the dimensions for different commodities. A barrel for fish was different from a barrel for wine or for nails. They were the unsung engineers of global commerce, and they knew their worth. You might hear this cooper grumble about the green wood a rival tried to pass off, or complain about the rising cost of good Baltic oak, all while his hands perform tasks his mind no longer even needs to consciously direct. You heft one of the new, empty barrels. It is surprisingly heavy, and its interior smells of toasted oak and promise. This barrel is not just a container, it's a microclimate. Its wood will breathe just slightly, allowing gases from the fermentation process to escape without letting in new air. It will be its own little universe for your herring. Historians still argue whether the development of the barrel was a necessary precursor to the long-distance fish trade, or merely its perfect complement. Could salted fish have been transported in clay amphorae, or in chests? Perhaps. But the barrel's strength, stackability, and rollability made the economics of moving massive quantities of heavy, wet goods across rutted roads and stormy seas not just possible, but profitable. As you roll your new barrel out of the shed towards the salting troughs, its iron hoops ringing against the stones, you understand you are not just moving a container. You are delivering a carefully crafted chamber of preservation, the final piece of the puzzle before the alchemy of salt and flesh begins. The careful world is built, quite literally, from the stave up. Now, the separate threads converge. You have the fish, cleaned and glistening. You have the salt, a mound of crystalline white wealth piled on a sackcloth. You have the barrel, standing open and expectant on the shed's earthen floor. You are now the salter. Your hands, already chapped and smelling of the sea, are about to become the instruments of the final, critical ritual. This is not cooking, it is architecture. You are building an edible pyramid, layer by meticulous layer, inside a dark, wooden vault. First, you scatter a handful of salt across the bottom of the barrel, a foundation, a bed. Then, you reach into the swill and grab a handful of herring. They are cool and slippery, their skin like damp silk. You arrange them in a circle, heads pointing outward, tails toward the center, packing them close but not crushing them. This is the first course. Once the circle is complete, you take another generous handful of salt and sprinkle it evenly over the fish, a snowfall of preservation. The salt hits the wet flesh with a faint, hissing whisper. You then start the next layer, this time with the heads pointing inward, creating a stable, cross-hatched pattern. Fish, then salt. Fish, then salt. The rhythm is meditative, but the stakes are high. Too little salt, and putrefaction will win, creating a foul-smelling, toxic waste. Too much salt, and you've wasted precious money, making the fish inedibly bitter and harsh, a different kind of failure. This layered method is a widely accepted historical fact, the standard practice for barreling herring, known as gibbing or packing. It ensured even distribution of the preservative, drawing moisture out of the fish to form a protective brine while the salt penetrated the flesh. You are essentially creating a self-basting, self-preserving system inside a sealed wooden chamber. Your wrists begin to ache from the repetitive motion, and the salt finds every tiny crack in your skin, a constant, burning reminder of your task. The pile of herring shrinks, the mound of salt dwindles, the barrel fills. The only sounds are the slither of fish, the rustle of salt, and your own breathing. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that the very best salters, the masters of this craft, were said to have a feel for it. It wasn't just a recipe, it was intuition born of experience. They could judge the moisture content of the fish by touch, the quality of the salt by its grain, and adjust their layers accordingly. They might even use different amounts of salt for the first herring of the season, which were fatter, versus the later, leaner catches. In some ports, an official salter, appointed by the Merchant Guild, would inspect the packed barrels before they were sealed, thrusting an arm deep into the brine to feel the consistency and taste the developing cue. His approval was the stamp of quality that could make or break a merchant's reputation and price. You reach the top of the barrel. The final layer is a thick blanket of salt, a last line of defense. Now, you place the wooden lid on top. It fits snugly into the groove the cooper carved. You then take a heavy stone weight and place it directly on the lid. This is crucial. The weight will press down on the fish as they release their moisture, forcing out air pockets and ensuring the fish remain submerged in the brine that will soon form. The barrel is now a closed system, a biological time capsule. Historians still argue whether the exact ratios of fish to salt were standardized across Europe or varied wildly by region and tradition. Some point to civic ordinances in Hanseatic towns that prescribed specific measurements, aiming for quality control. Others suggest it was a more localized, secretive family knowledge, passed from parent to child, a competitive edge in a crowded market. As you step back from your finished barrel, wiping your salty hands on your already filthy tunic. You don't know if your ratio was perfect. You only know you followed the ritual. The first part of the careful work is done. Now, the invisible, silent work begins. You heave your sealed, weighted barrel into a corner of the cool, dark storeroom. It is not alone. Dozens, eventually hundreds, of identical barrels will join it, stacked in pyramids 3 or 4 high. The frantic energy of the beach is gone, replaced by a damp, profound quiet. This is the waiting room. Here, in the perpetual twilight, your barrel begins its transformation. You are no longer a salter. You are a watchman, a guardian of the silent ferment. Your job is to listen, to observe, and to intervene only if the careful world inside the wood goes wrong. The first sign of life is sound. A day or two after sealing, you might press your ear to the stave and hear it, a faint, slow gurgle. It is the sound of osmosis and diffusion, of moisture being violently pulled from the herring cells by the salt, pooling in the bottom of the barrel. Then, the biochemistry begins. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The salting process is not merely a passive drying, it's an active fermentation. Lactic acid bacteria, naturally present on the fish, begin to thrive in the salty, anaerobic environment. They are the unseen workforce, acidifying the flesh, suppressing the growth of truly dangerous spoilage bacteria, and contributing to that distinctive, tangy, savory flavor of well-cured salted herring. The fish is not just being preserved, it is being changed, its proteins broken down, its flavor deepened and complicated. You make your rounds in the storeroom, a lantern casting long, dancing shadows. You are checking for weepers. This is a barrel that is leaking from a seam, losing precious brine. If you find one, you must call the cooper for an emergency repair, or risk the entire batch drying out and spoiling. You are also smelling. The air in the shed is complex, a dominant note of salt and ocean, but underneath, a developing bouquet of umami, a hint of cheese, a promise of something savory and sharp. It should not smell sweetly putrid, like rotting fruit. That is the smell of failure, of Clostridium botulinum finding a hospitable pocket without enough salt or acid. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is that medieval people had a sophisticated, if non-scientific, vocabulary for these stages. They spoke of the fish falling as it softened, of the brine working, and of the final product having a good nose. A master salter could diagnose problems by smell alone. A whiff of butter indicated a different, less desirable bacterial process. A scent of eggs warned of sulfur-producing microbes. Weeks pass. The gurgling subsides. The barrel becomes still and heavy with its own brine. You might, at the direction of the head salter, perform a racking. This involves temporarily removing the bung, draining off some of the murky, protein-rich brine that has formed. This fish pickle was sometimes used as a condiment or cooking liquid in its own right, and topping up the barrel with fresh brine or a bit more salt. It's a delicate operation, a rebalancing of the internal ecosystem. You are a gardener tending a very salty, very fishy crop. Historians still argue whether medieval salters understood the microbial processes at work in their barrels. Did they know about lactic acid bacteria? Of course not in those terms. But they absolutely understood the effects. They knew that a certain temperature range was ideal, that cleanliness, as they defined it, mattered, that time and observation were key. Their knowledge was empirical, built on generations of trial and catastrophic error. It was a science of sensory cues, sight, smell, touch, and even taste. As you stand in the quiet dark, the tang of the working barrels in your nostrils, you are living in that space between unknowing instinct and precise, repeatable result. The careful world is now a patient one, a slow, secretive dance between wood, salt, fish, and a universe of tiny, living things you will never see. Your barrel has sat through the turning of seasons. The autumn gales that brought in the herring have given way to winter's silent frost, which has, in turn, thawed into a damp, chilly spring. It is now a commodity, a unit of preserved nutrition, and its careful world is about to get very mobile. You help roll it out of the storeroom, its weight substantial and sloshing, onto a sturdy wooden cart. The journey from this processing shed to a consumer's table, perhaps hundreds of miles inland, is a perilous ballet of logistics, and you are now part of the stage crew. The cart, pulled by oxen with breath steaming in the cold air, rumbles over rotted tracks to the nearest river port or sheltered harbor. Every jolt is a potential disaster, testing the cooper's hoops and the salter's pack. At the waterside, a new kind of expert takes over, the stevedores. Using ropes and muscle, they roll your barrel up a narrow, groaning plank and into the hold of a cog, the workhorse ship of the Hanseatic League. The hold is a dark, cavernous space, already filling with barrels, not just of fish, but of salt, of ale, of cloth. Your barrel is nestled among its kin, secured with wooden chocks to prevent it from shifting in a storm. The ship's master is a calculator of space and weight. He knows exactly how many barrels his vessel can carry before it becomes unsafe. Your herring is now a line in his ledger, a portion of his gamble against the sea. This voyage is a widely accepted historical fact. The network of trade routes connecting the North Sea and Baltic to the rest of Europe was the lifeblood of the medieval economy, and salted fish was a staple cargo. These cogs would sail from ports like Yarmouth or Scania to Bruges, to Bergen, to London, and up the great rivers of Europe. The barrel you packed might end up in a Flanders market, a German monastery, or even on a table in landlocked Prague. The fish inside has become a traveler, its taste a direct link to a distant, salty sea its consumer has never seen. But the journey is not gentle. At sea, the barrel is subjected to a whole new set of stresses. The constant, rhythmic rocking. The damp, salty air that is different from the brine within. Temperature fluctuations as the ship moves from cold northern waters to milder climates. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail involves the ship's rats. They are a constant plague, and a wooden barrel, especially one smelling of fish, is a tantalizing treasure chest. They will gnaw relentlessly at the staves to get at the riches inside. Some merchants paid for a special service, the placement of a cat in the hold, not just as a pest controller, but as a psychological deterrent. Records show ships carrying cat goods sometimes commanded slightly lower insurance rates, the feline presence being a mark of a careful captain. Your barrel might bear the faint, curious scratches of rodent teeth, a testament to the journey's perils. Finally, the ship arrives. Your barrel is rolled back onto another cart, and the land journey resumes, perhaps following the salt road in reverse. It arrives at a merchant's warehouse in a bustling city. Here, it might be sold wholesale, or its bung might be pulled for the first time in months. The merchant or his buyer will inspect the contents, judging the color, the smell, the firmness of the flesh. Historians still argue whether the long-distance trade in bulk-barreled fish depressed local freshwater fishing economies. Could a peasant in Bavaria now afford salted sea herring more easily than a fresh trout from a nearby stream? The answer varies by region and century, but the very existence of your barrel, sitting in a Bavarian warehouse, is evidence of a market that transcended local ecology, connecting the global to the granular in a web of hunger, faith, and commerce. The careful world has expanded to encompass sea lanes, cart tracks, and market squares. Your single barrel is now a tiny, salty cog in a vast, grinding machine. But let's rewind the journey, back before the barrel ever left the coast. For the herring run was not just an industry, it was a seasonal, migratory human event. You are not at a permanent town now. You are in a fish station, a temporary boomtown that sprouts like a mushroom on a damp coastline for the few critical months of the herring season. Imagine a vast, chaotic encampment. Hundreds of boats are drawn up on the shore. Along the high tide line, a shanty town of huts, tents, and lean-tos stretches as far as you can see, built from driftwood, sailcloth, and wattle. Smoke from countless fires coils into the gray sky, mixing with the ever-present fishy haze. This is where the careful world becomes a frantic, living society. You share a cramped, damp hut with 5 other shoremen. Your bed is a pile of straw and your own bundled-up cloak. The ground is always slightly muddy. The noise is constant, the shouts of auctioneers selling the day's catch, the clatter of coopers, the creak of windlasses, the raucous laughter and occasional brawl from the ale stalls that have sprung up to separate you from your meager wages. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The major herring fisheries, like the famous one at the Scania Fair in modern-day Sweden, were immense temporary settlements, drawing thousands of workers, fishermen, gutters, salters, coopers, merchants, priests, prostitutes, and thieves, from across northern Europe. It was a medieval pop-up city, running on a single, silver commodity. You walk down the main street, a wide path of churned mud and fish offal. You pass the merchant compounds, larger and better-built tents where the factors who fronted the money for salt and barrels tally their ledgers by lamplight. You pass the church tent, where a weary priest offers mass for men who smell more of the sea than of incense. You buy a bowl of thin fish stew from a cook shop, the herring in it so heavily salted it makes your lips pucker. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is the sheer amount of bureaucracy that governed this seeming chaos. At organized stations like Scania, the Hanseatic League enforced strict market laws. There were rules about when fishing could start and end each day, signaled by a flag or bell, laws against selling green, unsalted, fish outside the official market, and specific places designated for different nationalities. The Danes here, the Germans there, the Dutch over yonder. There were even official taste testers and inspectors who could condemn an entire barrel lot if it didn't meet standards, their word law in this temporary kingdom. Life here is hard, short, and intense. Work lasts from dawn until you can no longer see your hands. Injuries are common, sliced fingers, crushed toes, backs thrown out from heaving barrels. Disease rips through the crowded, unsanitary conditions. But the money, for those few months, can be good. Or at least, it feels good when there's nowhere to spend it but on overpriced ale, bad food, and gambling. You see men who have worked a 6-week stint walk away with a small fortune in coin, only to be relieved of it by pickpockets or their own poor choices before they've even left the camp. This society has its own hierarchies, its own justice, often swift and brutal, and its own fleeting camaraderie. Historians still argue whether these seasonal stations were engines of economic opportunity or traps of exploitative labor. Was it a chance for a poor farm boy to earn cash and see the world? Or was it a grim, industrial meat grinder that consumed young men for the profit of distant merchants? As you lie in your hut, listening to the rain drum on the sailcloth roof and the distant, mournful cry of a gull, the truth likely sits, uncomfortable and smelly, somewhere in the middle. The careful world, you realize, is also a desperate and transient one, built on a foundation of seasonal silver and human sweat, destined to vanish with the last shoal, leaving only bone middens and memories in the sand. The fish you salted, the barrel you shipped, the boomtown you lived in, none of it would exist on such a scale without a powerful, invisible force shaping demand. To understand this, we leave the salty coast behind. You are now in a place of quiet stone, of murmured Latin, and of disciplined hunger. You are in the refectory of a medieval monastery on a Friday. The room is austere, the long tables scrubbed clean. The monks file in silently, their habits whispering against the flagstones. Before them is placed a simple wooden bowl. In it lies a piece of your herring, soaked to remove some of the salt, boiled or perhaps fried. It is not a delicacy. It is penance, sustenance, and obedience, all on a wooden plate. This is the engine, the Christian calendar of fasting. The widely accepted historical fact is that the Church prescribed over 100 fast days a year, every Friday, every Saturday, Lent, Advent, and various vigils and ember days. On these days, the consumption of meat from land animals was forbidden. But Pisces, fish, were permitted. This created a massive, predictable, and insatiable market for preserved protein. Your barrel of herring wasn't just food. It was a spiritual utility, a way for millions of faithful, from the king in his castle to the peasant in his hovel, to obey God and still have the strength to work. The monastic orders, with their large, organized communities, were bulk buyers, their cellars stocked with barrels to see them through Lent. The Church didn't just create the market, it sanctified the entire, smelly industry. You sit at the end of the monk's table, a guest of silence. The monk across from you eats methodically, his eyes downcast. The fish is bland, chewy, a vehicle for piety rather than pleasure. But it is nourishment. For a poor family in a village far from any river, a piece of salted herring on a fast day might be the only significant source of animal protein they see for weeks. It kept armies on the march and cities fed through lean winters. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is the sometimes absurd theological debates over what exactly constituted a fish. Was the beaver, because it lived in water, a fish? Often, yes, for fasting purposes. What about barnacle geese, which were believed to be born from driftwood? A controversial but occasionally accepted loophole. This piscine loophole extended to dolphins, whales, and even puffins in some regions, a testament to the creative lengths people would go to circumvent the spirit of the law while obeying its letter. Your humble herring, however, was never in doubt. It was the fast day workhorse. The economic power of this religious rule was staggering. It made fishermen and fish merchants vital to the social order. It funded the ships of the Hanseatic League, which you could think of as a pious, profit-seeking cartel. Kings granted special privileges to fishing fleets because a well-fed, obedient population was a stable one. The fish trade was, in a very real sense, God's business. Historians still argue whether the Church's fasting rules were a primary driver for the development of deep-sea fishing technology, or simply the beneficiary of an existing trend. Did the demand create the means, or did the means, improved nets, larger ships, simply meet a pre-existing, doctrine-created demand with explosive results? In the silent refectory, as the monk finishes his fish and folds his hands in prayer, the distinction seems academic. The link is undeniable. The careful world of salt and barrels was, ultimately, built to serve faith, to turn the silver of the sea into edible virtue. Your cold, numbing work on the beach was, in the grand scheme, an act of distant, mundane piety. Follow the herring, and you follow the silver. That piety on the monk's plate had a precise, often brutal, monetary value. So let's trace the drip of wealth your single barrel creates, from the moment the net is hauled. You are back on the beach, but now you are the merchant's factor, a man with a wax tablet and a sharp quill, standing slightly apart from the stink and sweat. You are not here to fish, you are here to account for it. The boat lands. The catch is roughly measured, by the last, a unit of about 10,000 to 13,000 herring, or by the barrel's worth. The fisherman, the boat owner, he gets paid first, but it's a piece of a much smaller pie. You, the factor, immediately deduct the cost of the salt, which you advanced. You deduct the cost of the barrels, which you commissioned. You deduct a fee for the use of the processing sheds and the land. You might even deduct a percentage for the privilege of fishing these waters, a tax paid to the local lord or crown. What remains is split, but not evenly. The boat owner takes a larger share, the crew divides the rest. For the man who actually hauled the net, his pay is a handful of coins, and perhaps a few broken fish, once damaged in the process, to take home. This economic chain is a widely accepted historical fact. The medieval fishing industry, for all its scale, was starkly hierarchical, with the greatest profits accumulating not with the laborers, but with the merchants who controlled capital, logistics, and markets. Your barrel, now sealed, represents a future profit. You will sell it to a ship's master, or to another merchant's agent at a trade fair. But before it even leaves, the taxman wants his share. There were tolls for moving goods along rivers, tolls for entering city gates, market taxes, and export duties. In some places, like the Hanseatic contours, a percentage of every barrel was claimed as a fee for the privilege of trading under the league's protection and laws. The herring was a liquid asset, and everyone with a seal or a sword wanted to skim a little off the top. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is the existence of fish money, or specific coinage struck for use at the great fishing fairs. At the Scania Fair, for instance, the sheer volume and speed of transactions, with buyers and sellers from a dozen different realms, necessitated a reliable, agreed-upon currency. You might be paid in Scania pennies, useful only at the fair or in associated ports, another layer of control exerted by the mercantile powers over the flow of silver. Now, picture the merchant who owns your operation. He is likely not on the beach. He is in a comfortable townhouse in Lübeck, Bruges, or Bergen. His wealth is built on a foundation of these thousands of barrels, a diversification of risk across multiple boats, multiple seasons. He uses his profits to buy land, to loan money, to finance other ventures. He becomes part of the urban patriciate, a man of influence. The fish trade created merchant kings, families whose power rivaled that of minor nobility. Yet, this wealth is incredibly fragile. A report arrives, a ship carrying 50 of his barrels foundered in a spring storm. Another letter, a competitor has undercut his price at the Gdansk market. A third, an outbreak of disease has struck the fishing station, halving the season's output. His ledger is a story of calculated gambles. Historians still argue whether the capital generated by the fish trade was a significant driver of the broader commercial revolution of the later Middle Ages, funding banking, exploration, and urbanization, or if it was merely a lucrative tributary feeding into a larger river of economic change. As the factor on the beach, you only see your column of numbers, the slow conversion of silver scales into silver coins, each step of the way carefully measured, deducted, and recorded. The careful world is, above all, a mercenary one. The world of salted fish is not a monolith of herring. So, let's shift latitudes drastically. The damp, crowded North Sea fades, replaced by a sharper, cleaner cold. You are on a wind-scoured rock of an island off the coast of Iceland, or perhaps on a fjord in Norway. The air is so cold it feels brittle in your lungs, and the smell is different, less of immediate decay, more of clean brine and pine. Here, the fish is not the small, silvery herring, but the cod, a larger, firmer, white-fleshed predator. And the preservation method is not the wet, fermenting brine of the barrel, but something that seems almost simple, air and wind. You are about to learn the art of the stockfish. The cod, once landed, is beheaded and split open along its spine, laid flat like a fleshy, bony butterfly. The guts and the backbone are removed. This is not a job of frantic speed, but of careful butchery. Then, instead of salt, you use clamps made of wood or fish spines to hold the fish open, and you hang it on towering, A-frame wooden racks called gel. The widely accepted historical fact is that this process, called making stockfish, relies on the combination of cold, dry, consistent wind and the natural antibacterial properties of the fish's own flesh to dehydrate it completely. It is freeze-drying on a medieval, industrial scale. The Arctic wind, which would be your enemy on the North Sea beach, is here your primary and free preservative agent. You spend days turning the fish on the racks, ensuring every part is exposed, watching as the flesh transforms from translucent and soft to a hard, rigid, yellowish board. It loses about 80% of its weight. What remains is virtually indestructible. A properly made stockfish is so hard you could use it as a weapon. It will keep for years, decades even. This is the protein that will fuel Viking expeditions, supply Norwegian traders, and feed the Catholic South during Lent. It is a different kind of careful world, one of patience and climate, where the environment itself is the salting shed. The taste, when finally reconstituted after days of pounding and soaking, is intensely, purely of fish, a stark, clean flavor compared to the tangy, fermented complexity of barreled herring. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is the international journey of this rock-hard food. Norwegian stockfish became a coveted luxury in parts of southern Europe, especially Italy. It was known as stoccafisso or bacala, though true bacala is salt-cured, not wind-dried, a confusion that persists today. Italian merchants developed elaborate methods to restore it, beating it with mallets and soaking it in multiple changes of water for days before cooking it into rich stews. Imagine the cognitive dissonance of a Venetian cook, working with this strange, wooden plank of Arctic protein, a product of a world so alien to his sun-drenched canals. The trade routes for stockfish were just as vital as the herring routes, linking the extreme north to the Mediterranean in a chain of demand and supply that bypassed the need for expensive salt. Historians still argue whether the development of stockfish production in the North Atlantic was an independent innovation born of necessity, a lack of accessible salt, or a technology adapted from earlier, perhaps Sami, methods of preserving reindeer meat. Was it a brilliant accident of geography, or a deliberate application of observed natural principles? Standing by the gel, your fingers numb, turning a cod that already feels like leather, you are living in that innovation. The careful world here is quieter, more spacious, and in its own way, even more demanding. It requires a specific, unforgiving climate, too warm or damp, and the fish rots, too moist, and it never dries. It is a testament to human adaptation, to finding a way to cheat time not with a precious imported mineral, but with the very air you breathe. The wind that chaps your face is, itself, the salt. For all the care, all the ritual, all the capital invested, failure was not just a possibility, it was a constant, lurking shadow. The careful world is a fragile one, perpetually balanced on the edge of spoilage. You are in the storeroom again, but the mood is different. A dread hangs in the salty air. One of the barrels, 3 rows back and 2 up in the stack, is a weeper that wasn't caught in time, or perhaps it was packed by a salter having an off day, or maybe the salt had a damp clot in it. It has gone over. You are about to meet the consequence of a mistake. The first sign is the smell. It cuts through the normal tang of fermentation, a sickly sweet, putrid odor, like rotting fruit left in the sun. It's unmistakable and stomach-turning. The master salter orders the suspect barrel brought down and rolled into the open air. Using a bung starter, he pries out the plug. What emerges is not the sharp, appetizing brine of a good barrel, but a foul, gaseous belch. The liquid that trickles out is murky and foul. He dips a clean stick in, pulls it out, and the substance clinging to it is slimy, not firm. The fish, when hooked out with a gaff, are mushy, discolored, falling apart. The barrel is a total loss. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Spoilage and outright poisoning were occupational hazards of the pre-modern food trade. The economic loss is severe. The cost of the fish, the salt, the barrel, the labor, all gone. For a small operator, a few bad barrels could mean ruin. But the danger goes beyond lost coins. There is a hidden, silent killer that can lurk even in barrels that don't smell obviously putrid: botulism. The bacterium Clostridium botulinum thrives in low oxygen, low acid environments. A barrel with uneven salt distribution, or one that wasn't kept cool enough, could become a breeding ground for a toxin so potent a speck could kill. Medieval people didn't know about bacteria, but they knew about poisoned fish. Chronicles occasionally report the sudden, mysterious deaths of whole households or even groups of travelers after a meal. They blamed imbalances of humors or divine wrath, but the culprit was often there, invisible in the salty flesh. A lesser-known, slightly amusing, in a grim way, detail is the existence of early quality control tests. In some regions, a suspect fish might be thrown to a dog or a cat first. If the animal sickened or died, the batch was destroyed. Other tests were more interpersonal. A merchant might force the salter who packed a bad barrel to eat a portion of his own product as punishment and proof. It was a high-stakes, literally gut-check form of accountability. You help roll the spoiled barrel away, holding your breath. Its contents will be buried far from the settlement or dumped into a fast-moving current. The very wood of the barrel, now contaminated, might be burned. The failure is a somber lesson for everyone. It reinforces why the rituals are so strict, why the guild rules are so unbending. Every step you've taken so far, the quick gutting, the precise salting, the weighted lid, the cool storage, is a direct response to this specter of rotten death. Historians still argue about the frequency of such catastrophic spoilage and food poisoning. Was it a common, accepted risk of medieval life, or a relatively rare event given the empirically perfected techniques? The records are spotty. People didn't always connect a distant illness to a meal eaten days before. But the very existence of stringent laws governing the fish trade, and the palpable fear of bad fish, suggests it was a threat ever present in the medieval mind. The careful world, you now understand, is not just about creating food. It is a relentless, daily battle against an invisible enemy that wins more often than anyone would like to admit. The ripple effects of your barrel extend far beyond economics and into the very fabric of medieval geopolitics. Picture a map of Europe, not with modern borders, but with thick, dotted lines tracing the paths of ships and carts. One line runs from the Scania fair south to Lübeck, then down the Elbe. Another stretches from Bergen across the North Sea to London and Bruges. A third darts from Iceland, hugging the Norwegian coast, down to the British Isles. These are the arteries of the fish trade, and along them flows not just protein, but power, diplomacy, and conflict. Your careful work on a distant beach is a tiny cause with global effects. Take the Hanseatic League, that formidable consortium of German merchant towns. Its rise was inextricably linked to the control of the salted herring trade, particularly at Scania. The League secured trading privileges, built fortified contours, foreign trading posts, and enforced its own maritime law. They didn't just sell fish. They used the fish trade to create a commercial empire that challenged kings. When the English or Danish monarchs tried to impose taxes or restrict Hanseatic privileges, the League could respond with a trade embargo, a fish freeze. Suddenly, the supply of affordable, Lent-friendly protein to a kingdom would dry up, causing public unrest and pressuring the crown to back down. This is a widely accepted historical fact. The Hanseatic League's economic power, built substantially on fish, made it a major political player in Northern Europe for centuries. Your barrel might also be a tool of war. Naval expeditions and land armies on the march required vast quantities of non-perishable food. Contracts for supplying armies would include thousands of barrels of salted herring or stockfish. The ability to provision troops could determine the outcome of a siege or a campaign. Furthermore, the wealth generated by the trade funded ships that could be pressed into naval service and filled the coffers that paid for mercenaries. The fish that sustained a monk in prayer also sustained a soldier in battle. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail involves the use of fish in what we might call soft power. Gifts of particularly fine stockfish or choice barrels of herring were recorded in diplomatic correspondence between kings and popes. Sending 100 barrels of prime Scania herring to an ally's court was a tangible, useful display of goodwill, a luxury staple that spoke of both wealth and practical support. It was the medieval equivalent of sending a very large, very smelly fruit basket. The trade also fostered strange, intense connections between wildly different cultures. Basque whalers operating off Iceland might trade for stockfish. Italian galley ships from Venice and Genoa, sailing through the Strait of Gibraltar to reach the markets of Flanders and England, would load up with salt from the south and return with northern fish, creating a circular economy of preservation. Your barrel, in this light, is a node in a vast, interconnected web. Historians still argue whether the fish trade was a primary cause of the integration of the European economy in the late Middle Ages, or merely its most visible and odorous symptom. Did the demand for fish force the creation of complex financial instruments, insurance, and long-distance partnerships? Or were those business innovations simply applied to an already lucrative commodity? As you imagine your barrel being loaded onto a Venetian galley in Southampton, the debate feels academic. The simple fact is that it is there, a product of a North Sea breeze, now in the hold of a ship from a sea of sunshine, linking the worlds of the herring and the olive in a shade, salty purpose. The careful world has become a geopolitical one. All things must pass, even the most careful world. The bustling seasonal station is deserted, the barrels shipped, the coopers shed silent. Centuries roll over the coastline like fog. What remains? You are no longer a medieval worker. You are an archaeologist, kneeling in the wet soil of a modern development site on the edge of a historic European town. Your tools are a trowel and a brush. And you are looking for the ghost of the fish trade in the dirt. Your trowel scrapes away layers of soil, and you find not silver, but garbage, the medieval midden. And it is full of bones. Tiny, delicate, countless herring vertebrae, like minuscule buttons. Skulls of cod. These are the silver of the sea transformed into the black gold of archaeology. By analyzing these bone deposits, experts can determine species, size, season of catch, and even trace fishing pressures over time. A layer thick with large cod bones followed by a layer of smaller ones might tell a story of overfishing. This is a widely accepted historical fact. Zooarchaeology, the study of animal remains, provides one of the most direct windows into the scale and nature of the medieval fish trade, often revealing details written records ignore. But you find more than bones. You might uncover the stained, crushed outlines of the very wooden troughs you used for gutting and salting, preserved in the waterlogged, anaerobic soil. You might find a rusted hook of a gaff, a broken piece of a cooper's draw knife, or a lead fishing weight. In a waterfront warehouse district, you could find the post holes of the massive racks used for drying stockfish. And if you're incredibly lucky, in a perfectly waterlogged site like those found in some Baltic harbors, you might find a nearly intact barrel, its staves held together by corroded hoops, a millennium-old time capsule waiting to be studied. Each object is a silent witness to the careful rituals you've been living through. A lesser-known, slightly amusing detail is what archaeologists call the fish event horizon. In middens across northern Europe, there is a clear, stratigraphic line. Below it, in earlier medieval layers, fish bones are relatively rare. Above it, from about the 11th century onward, they explode in number, becoming a dominant part of the waste. This horizon marks the point when sea fishing, preservation, and trade moved from a local, small-scale activity to the industrial-scale phenomenon we've been exploring. It's a literal line in the dirt, proving an economic and dietary revolution. You are sitting above that line, your fingers tracing the outline of a herring vertebra smaller than a grain of rice. Yet, for all these physical clues, much remains shrouded. Historians and archaeologists still argue fiercely about the daily lives of the people in the fish stations. Written records tell us about laws, taxes, and prices, but they are largely silent on the lived experience of the gutter, the salter, the cooper. How did they really organize their days? What songs did they sing? How did the constant, overwhelming smell affect them? The bones and the post holes give us the skeleton of the industry, but the flesh and blood, the laughter, the aches, the taste of that nightly bowl of stew, have evaporated like morning mist from a salting pan. As you brush the date from a tiny bone, you are touching the solid, undeniable proof of the careful world, but its sounds and smells are history you can only imagine, built upon the fragments left behind. The empire of salt and fish, like all empires, did not last forever. The careful world you've inhabited for this journey begins to encounter subtle, then seismic, shifts. Imagine it's the 16th century, and you are a merchant's son in Amsterdam, looking over your father's ledgers. The columns of numbers for barreled herring are still there, but something new has appeared: entries for pickled fish, and for catches from distant, icy waters off Newfoundland. The wind is changing, and with it, the taste of the sea. The first challenge is technological, and it arrives in the form of the gibbing knife and the Hollandsnijver, or new Dutch herring. Around the early 15th century, Dutch fishermen perfected a method of removing a herring's gills and part of its gullet with a single slice, leaving the pancreas in place. This organ releases enzymes that create a milder, sweeter cure. The fish could then be lightly brined in barrels and consumed relatively quickly, within a few months, as a fresh salted product. This soused herring was a different culinary experience, less funky, less fermented, more immediately palatable. It began to compete with the heavily salted, long-aged barrel stock that had been the staple for centuries. This shift is a widely accepted historical fact. The Dutch innovation represented a move towards a milder, more fresh taste, catering to evolving palates that had more access to spices and other luxuries to mask strong flavors. Then came the geographic shift. As European ships grew more capable, they pushed across the Atlantic. The cod banks off Newfoundland were discovered, and they made the North Sea shoals look like a pond. The scale of catch was unimaginable. And while much of this new catch was turned into traditional stockfish or salt cod, the sheer abundance began to alter markets and pressures. Furthermore, new preservation methods like smoking, always known but now refined and scaled, offered another alternative to the pure salt-and-time approach. A world that had been defined by the careful equilibrium of one method was now a world of choices. A lesser-known, amusing detail is the resistance to change. The old Hanseatic towns, their wealth and identity built on the traditional barrel trade, looked down on the new Dutch marches herring as a passing fad, an unserious product for unserious people. They clung to their stricter, older standards, much like vinyl purists scoffing at digital music. There were trade wars, propaganda, and fierce debates about which fish was truly proper for fasting and for commerce. It was a clash of culinary cultures, with your original, painstakingly crafted barrel of sour herring now representing the old guard. But perhaps the most profound shift was religious. The Protestant Reformation, sweeping across northern Europe in the 16th century, did away with the mandatory, universal Catholic fasting laws. For reformers, avoiding meat on Friday was a matter of popish superstition, not divine command. While many people continued to eat fish out of habit, preference, or local ordinance, The enormous, guaranteed, church-mandated market began to fracture. The economic engine that had driven the industry for half a millennium was losing its steam. Historians still argue whether the decline of the medieval fish salting complex was due more to these religious changes or to the combined pressures of new technology and new fishing grounds. Was it a crisis of demand, or of supply and method? The answer is, as with most history, all of the above. The careful world didn't vanish. Salted and dried fish remain staples in many cultures today, but its absolute dominance, its ability to shape coastlines, laws, and wars, gradually ebbed away, replaced by a more diverse, more global, and slightly less smelly food system. Gradually, the specifics begin to soften at the edges, like a coastline seen through sea mist. The precise counts of herring in a last, the exact grain of salt from Bournemouth Bay, the legal statutes of the Scania Fair, these details, so pressing to the world we've walked through, start to recede into a gentler, more impressionistic memory. You are no longer feeling the cut of the wicker handle in your palm or the bone of salt in a knuckle. Instead, you are left with the broader sensations, the immense, echoing grey of the North Sea sky, the solid, reassuring curve of an oak stave, the deep, almost spiritual quiet of the storeroom where 1,000 barrels dreamed their slow, sour dreams. It was a world built on a foundation of universal human needs, hunger, faith, profit, and answered with a remarkable convergence of human ingenuity. It asked people to read the language of the waves and the wind, to understand the silent chemistry of fermentation, to engineer vessels of wood and iron that could circle a continent. It connected the monk in his cell, the merchant in his counting house, and the gutter on the bloody beach in a single, vast, interconnected system. A system that was, for all its carefulness, profoundly fragile, eternally at war with decay, and subject to the larger tides of history, taste, and belief. Now, let that imagery fade, like the last light leaving a long shore. Let the imagined chill in your fingers warm, let the phantom scent of brine and fish dissolve back into the comfortable, quiet dark of your own room. The careful world has done its work, it has preserved its story and passed it on to you. Its rhythms, the frantic splash of the landing, the patient gurgle of the brine, the slow creak of the cart, can now settle into a distant, lulling cadence, a memory of an order imposed upon the chaotic abundance of the sea. A order built, layer by careful layer, by generations of forgotten hands.